you can sit down here as well, by the way. Yeah, but then we're
Okay, everyone, welcome. We are going to begin with the evening service, the Mariv service, on page 281 in the blue Sidurim in front of you. Page 281. Please rise. ורחום יכפר עוון ולא ישכיב, והיבה לו שיבה פה ולא כל חמתו. אדוני הושיע מלך יעננו ביום קורנו, ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. May be seated. ברוך אתה אדוני. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המריב ערבים, אהבת עולם את ישראל עמך אהבת. כי הם חיינו וירחמנו במנהיג יום ובלילה, ויעבדך תשים ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ויאהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל אורך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך ובשוכבך וקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. יום שמות ביום אדוני שלם עוד הברך מישראל ציצית ציצית לכם לציצית ולתמודות למען תזכרו ועשיתם על כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים אלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. אמת ואמונה כזאת קיים עלינו ואדוני אלוהינו. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל לכאן, ושירה בשמחה רבה, ויאמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נוראתי לא רוסף אלה, מלכותך רוב ונכבו קיים לפני משה, זה ליאנו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר כי יפדה אדוני כי הכל, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני God Israel. Join me on page 284. Help us, Adonai, to lie down in peace and awaken us again, our sovereign to life. Spread over us your shelter of peace. Guide us with your good counsel. Save us because of your mercy. Shield us from enemies and pestilence, from starvation, sword, and sorrow. Remove the evil forces that surround us. Shelter us in the shadow of your wings, O God, who watches over us and delivers us, our gracious and merciful ruler. God, our coming and our going, grant us life and peace now and always. Praise are you, Adonai, eternal guardian of your people Israel. Ushmor tzeitenu v'oinu l'chaim u'shalom yata v'yad olam. Baruch ata Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael ad. Baruch Adonai le'olam amen ve'amen. כי המלכות שלך ימי אתם לא בכבוד כי אין המלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם וערב ועל כל מעשיו. יגדל ויקדש מרבה וילמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ובמכון וחייך בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יש מרבה מבורך לעולם ולעלמי עולמיה. יברא וישתבח וירפר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה ברכו לעילם במקום ברכתה ושירתה ולברכתה ונחמתה דמרן ועלמה ואמרו אמן. The Amida on page 286. Please rise. יגדל ויקדש מרבה ויעמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכון ובמכון וחייך בית ישראל בגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יש מרבה מבורך לעולם ולעלמי עולמיה. יתברך יברא וישתבח וירפר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה ברכו לעילם במקום ברכתה ושירתה וברכתה ונחמתה דמרן ועלמה ואמרו אמן. יקבל צלותו נבואתו לכל ישראל קדם ובכל וישמעיה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלום רבה משמע וחיים עלינו וכל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום אמרומה ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. Page 297. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגורלנו ככל המונם ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. אדוני אלוהים שמיים ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
For the 27th of Nisan, that is today, Thursday, Temple Beth Shalom observes with affection the yahrzeits of S. William Levy, Sophia Elsner, Aaron Fox, Judith Harmon, and Berthold Lipper. For Friday, for the 28th of Nisan, Temple Beth Shalom observes with affection the yahrzeits of Marilyn Friedman, Saul E. Grossman, Elaine Sherman, Evelyn Samet, and Frank Bloom. Also Samuel Cohn, Jean Bloom, Molly Donstein, and Judith Kossover. Mourners and those observing the yahrzeit of a close one, join now in the recitation of the Kaddish on page 298. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach hidrutei v'yamdich malkutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael b'agara v'zman kariv imeru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevorach v'elam me'omeh omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitaral shmei d'kedusha b'rechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata damiran b'alma v'yimaru amen. Yehei shlomo rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. May the God of peace send his peace to those who mourn, comfort the bereaved within our midst, and let us say, amen. You may be seated.
Welcome. Before the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany, it is estimated that 9.5 million Jews lived in Europe. 60% of the world's Jewish population and a mere 1.7% of the entire European population. They lived in villages, towns, and cities. They were farmers, teachers, doctors, lawyers, tailors, carpenters. Some were wealthy, some were considered middle class, and many were poor. They had children, sisters, brothers, parents, grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles, just like all of us. They laughed, they cried, they danced, they sang, they loved, and then senseless hatred took center stage. Who would have believed that one man and then one party in an educated, sophisticated country like Germany would foster such hatred against the Jews, and that hatred would spread throughout Europe? The laughter stopped, the music was silenced, and 6 million Jews, 2/3 of the entire Jewish population of Europe, were murdered, and millions more were displaced, homeless, and alone. Tonight, as you view the scrolls of remembrance here at Temple Beshalom, remember that each name there represents a real person, a person who laughed, who cried, who dreamt, and who loved. These are not just numbers or names, they were real people. On May 8, 1945, the Second World War was over in Europe. General Eisenhower made certain that the cameras came into the concentration camps to take footage of the atrocities that occurred there, for he knew that without actual documentation, people would soon forget. People would begin to disbelieve and say that it was impossible. On May 8, 1945, the world understood the inhumanity that people were capable of, and largely vowed that it would never happen again. Yet here we are. We watch the 24-hour news cycles and gasp in horror at the atrocities being committed in the Ukraine. We read about the forced sterilization of the Uyghurs in China, and unfortunately, we are witness to the rise of anti-Semitism throughout the world. Just last week, the ADL released their latest accounting of hate crimes against Jews in the United States. The result? Overall incidents were up 34%. Incidents of harassment against Jews were up 43%. Incidents against Jewish institutions were up 62%. Our own state of New York led the way with the most incidents of anti-Semitism in the country, up 24%. And right here in Nassau County, incidents targeting Jews or Jewish institutions were up 21%. Tonight we remember the 6 million that perished. We remember them for the people they were, for their dreams that were never fulfilled. We honor the survivors and try to understand their plight, their stories, their remarkable will to survive and strive. We remember them because we must. We honor them, but we also remember them for our own sakes, for our own survival, for as the American philosopher George Santayana stated, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We can never forget. We can never let the words "never again" just become a slogan. We must accept those words as our commitment to continue to live with the best of Jewish values in our lives, to fight unwarranted hatred against any people just because they look different or have different spiritual views. We will commit. We will remember. This year we are honored to welcome 4 survivors from our community to join us through pre-recorded video footage to light a candle in honor of their families and their experiences via video. Candles in their honor will also be lit here in the sanctuary.
What is your name? Shalom. Shalom.
Where are you from in Europe? And what camps were you in during the war? What camps were you in? And when did you come to America? What year? What year did you come to America? 45?
Yeah.
Right after the war?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to light this candle, okay? We're going to light this candle for your grandfather and your parents and your brothers and your sister and your aunts and uncles and cousins, all of them that were killed during the war, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to light it for you, all right? You want to do it? Okay. Give me your hand. Okay. Go ahead. Thank you. Off.
Touch my right?
Good afternoon. What is your name?
Zuzka Borenstein from the family Gutmann, with one N.
And where were you from in Europe?
Oh, I am from New York. I am born in Poland, and the town is Radom. And it's not only a town, it was full of Hasidim and with the birds, and it was lovely, beautiful, and from there I come. I was born in Radom.
Sipka Bornstein lighting a candle in memory of all the people she lost during the Holocaust.
Should I say then I should say something? The names?
If you want, sure.
No, you told me. But I heard. What did you say?
No, just your name. No, you're good. You're fine.
Yeah. Zoltel Bornstein Gutmann.
Dankeschön.
Irvin Foley, born in Czechoslovakia in 1927, lived in Munkac, Czechoslovakia, later Hungary, where we had 30,000 inhabitants, out of which less than half were Jews, of which about 10% survived. We were very comfortable until 1944, when the Germans came into Hungary, and we all ended up in Auschwitz, where my father, my brother, my 15 uncles and aunts, my grandfather, my two grandmothers, friends and cousins were murdered just because they were Jews. It's in their memory that I light this candle, and I was lucky enough I was lucky enough to survive, and with my mother and sister, we came to the States.
For Yom Hashoah, and this is, who are you, Mom? And what is your name?
Jean Meisner.
And where were you born?
We're born in little town of Turishkov near Kaish.
And what year were you born in?
1920.
Okay, July?
July 1920.
Okay. And what year did you come to the United States?
In April 1946.
And what camp were you in during the war?
I was in a few camps, but mainly I was in Berchtesgaden, and I was in Ravensbrück, and
that was it.
Yeah, Ravensbrück mainly, yeah.
Thank you for remembering Jean Meisner for Yom Hashoah.
Thank you.
I now ask Mrs. Seema Katz, a survivor from Cheval. Seema and her husband, Nathan, escaped from the Cheval ghetto and survived the war in hiding. They emigrated to the United States in 1951, and her granddaughter, Rebecca, will light a candle in her honor. The sixth candle in our Shoah candelabra will be lit in memory of all the 6 million Jews that perished in the Holocaust. May their memories be a blessing for us all.
Please rise for the memorial prayer. ושנשרפו ושנהרגו שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם בגן עדן, בגן עדן, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. ענה בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר
Please remain standing for the mourner's Kaddish. Please join me in reciting the mourner's Kaddish. It's found inside the program on the left-hand side of the page. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah v'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam olamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shenei tekucha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom imramav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. You may be seated. We now welcome to the Bima two of our Kita Zion students, Ariella Kranz and Marcus Kranz, to present Zachor.
So we wrote this, our whole class wrote this poem as our Holocaust curriculum. We remember their stories, we remember the survivors and the 6 million lost. We remember their spirit and pride and sacred traditions. We remember nights filled with shattered glass and all those families shattered like glass. We will remember to listen and learn and speak up for others and speak up for ourselves and teach our own children that we must always remember.
We will never forget the faces of survivors. We will never forget their fresh tears and brave words, and that they came to speak with us. We will never forget our relatives who perished and our relatives who lived with broken hearts. We will never forget their screams and cries and hardships. We will never forget those who fought back and the generosity of those who stood up and reached out and kept Jewish people safe. We will never forget the Holocaust. We will remember to stay strong. We will remember to keep the Sabbath and do mitzvot. We will remember to take pride in our Jewish identities. And be remembering all of this, we will never forget.
It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. She's no stranger to us. Rita Levy has been a resident of Roslyn and a beloved member of Temple Beth Shalom for almost 30 years. She grew up in Queens. After graduating from Barnard College, she received her MBA from Columbia Business School and her MPH from the Columbia School of Public Health. She then moved out to the West Coast, where she pursued her career in healthcare, finance, and administration in the San Francisco Bay Area. The family real estate business brought her and her husband David and their 2 children, Rebecca and Matthew, back to New York. Rita serves on the UJA's Long Island Women's Cabinet and UJ Long Island Executive Committee. She also serves on the board of the Sid Jacobson JCC, where she co-chairs the Cultural Arts Committee. Rita has served on the board of the American Society for Yad Vashem and attended almost every Yom Hashoah, an annual gathering of remembrance, from the days that it was held at Madison Square Garden to Temple Emmanuel to the most recent virtual events. She accompanied her parents on multiple occasions to light memorial candles and to attend survivor gatherings in New York, Los Angeles, and Israel. The whole family attended the opening ceremony of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Rita is one of the founding co-chairs of the UJA's Witness Project, an intergenerational program that has grown from one-time fundraising effort for Holocaust survivors in need to an annual program that also fosters education against anti-Semitism. Rita continues her involvement by serving on the Witness Project Honorary Board. She is proud to follow the family tradition of furthering Holocaust education and remembrance. Rita hopes that her children and grandchildren will continue her parents' legacy of Zachor v'lo tishkach, remember and never forget. It's my pleasure to call forward Rita Levy.
Thank you, Rabbi Lucas. To paraphrase a line from the Passover holiday we just celebrated, why is this Yom Hashoah different from all other Yom Hashowas? Because this year, we're watching bombs fall over the same cities where for the past 75 years we've been saying never again. Holocaust survivors watch TV news broadcasts and say, that's what happened to us. The atrocities that we find so difficult to see on TV and to read about, they are a source of post-traumatic stress disorder for those survivors who lived through it themselves. For those who managed to survive Hitler, only to find themselves living under Stalin's Soviet rule immediately following the end of World War II. For those survivors, the first thing they said on Thursday, February 24th, when Russia invaded Ukraine was, they're going to have to get to Poland to escape. They didn't need to look at a world map to see exactly where Ukraine is. They remembered what they did 75 years ago. While the events in Ukraine are horrific, and while our hearts grieve with them, it is not the Holocaust. I am neither a politician nor a historian. The only thing that qualifies me to speak to you this evening is that I am a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. My mother, Sima Katz, who is here with us this evening, along with my father, Nathan Katz's memoir, are my source material. We are here tonight to remember my mother's sister, Rochela, my father's brother Label, his mother Rochel, and the 6 million other Jews who perished. And we're here to honor those who survived. It is our responsibility to bear witness to what happened 80 years ago, because there was no CNN back then. There were no cell phone cameras to document what happened. All we have are their stories. As Elie Wiesel so famously said, whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. And tonight, we all become witnesses. Every single survivor has a story. Did they survive because they're smart, or particularly strong, or sly? Everyone was lucky. And how can you say someone who went through the Holocaust was lucky? Because they survived. Here's my mother's story. Sima was born in Lithuania, not far from Ukraine. And like most of us here in this room, she was born in a comfortable home in a loving family. If you have a vision of babushkas and huts and something out of Fiddler on the Roof, erase that. It was the 1920s, and there's a great picture of my mother as a baby in her mother's arms. Her mother has a short bob, she's wearing a sleeveless dress, and my mother is holding on to her mother's strand of pearls. Mom remembers lots of music in the house and dinner parties around a black lacquered dining room table. She went to a Jewish day school where everything was taught in Hebrew. They spoke Yiddish at home, and of course she spoke the native language, Lithuanian. Like most Europeans, she was fluent in multiple languages. Sima went to summer camp. She and her little sister visited their grandparents. She sang at charity concerts and always performed in her school plays. The plan was that after graduation, she would join her uncle Richard in Paris to study interior design. But then the war broke out in 1939 and the borders were closed, and so Sima couldn't get to Paris. She had a steady boyfriend, Perry, whose father owned the biggest store in town, the city of Shavel. Soon after the war broke out, Perry's cousin, Nathan, moved to Shavel in order to escape the anti-Semitic violence in his town. Perry was gracious enough to invite his cousin along on his dates with Sima, but soon it became obvious that Sima and Nathan were the happy couple, and Perry wasn't too happy about that. So Sima suggested that Perry ask the pretty cashier in his father's store, Riva, for a date. Perry wasn't so sure that his parents would approve of him dating someone who worked in the store, so they would ride their bicycles out of town for double dates. And I've never been able to get more details than that. On June 22nd, 1941, on a beautiful sunny morning, everyone woke up to the sounds of sirens and bombs falling. People ran into the streets screaming, "War!" They didn't know what to do, where to run, or where to hide. Sima ran to Nathan's house. He told her that wherever his parents went, she would go with them. They decided to leave town, heading north toward Latvia, toward Russia. It was spontaneous flight. It wasn't as if people went from house to house yelling, "Flee!" The roads were full of people, everyone carrying whatever they could. One went with a bicycle, another went with a horse and cart, and another with just a backpack on his back. At this point, I should tell you that both Sima's parents had died of natural causes, and her sister Rochela was living in Vilna with their stepfather. Sima was living with her aunt and uncle in Shavel, and she didn't know then that her sister would not survive the war. Sima and her aunt and uncle fled with Nathan's family. They had 3 bicycles. No one had a car. Nathan, his father, and his older brother, Label, loaded as many things as possible on those bicycles. Food, fabric, whatever they thought would be valuable for trading, and just left everything else in the house. So what would you take with you if you suddenly had to flee your home? What are the people in Ukraine taking in those roller bags that they're dragging behind them? 18-year-old Sima folded a dish towel into a pocket, attached it to a string to wear around her neck, underneath her dress, and put her treasured photos in that pocket. And she wore that for the duration of the war. They headed north, on foot, pushing 2 of the bicycles. Label, on his bicycle, went 3 or 4 miles ahead to make sure that the road was clear. The rest of the group walked. The German planes would swoop down and strafe the roads. They would throw themselves into ditches on the side of the road in order to dodge the bullets. And all around them they saw people dead and dying. And I asked my mother, what was that like? So unimaginable. And she said it was like she was in some kind of surrealistic, out-of-body experience, that it really couldn't be happening to her. Life as a Jew in Lithuania had been hard under Stalin, but at least there was life. Under Hitler, there would be no life at all. They realized that all the rumors they had heard about what was happening to Jews in Western Europe was true, and that they were next. People were desperate to get away. And think about that. Where would you go? Can you imagine if bombs all of a sudden started falling on Roslyn, an enemy coming to you from the South Shore? Would you start walking north on Roslyn Road or Glen Cove Road, trying to get to Canada, or at least Connecticut? Inconceivable, right? In 2022. Well, that's what they thought in 1941. And that's what they're thinking right now in Ukraine. So there they were, not knowing exactly where they were going, just heading north, away from the Germans. It was June and the weather was warm and gorgeous. The landscape was flat, bright green fields and forests with the blue sky above. They walked for more than a week, day and night, on roads that wound through fields and countryside. They felt they had no choice. They couldn't go back. It was all in God's hands, and Label continued scouting for them. But then German troops passed them on the way to Latvia, so they knew they couldn't go forward. And then Label didn't return from one of the scouting trips, and many years later Nathan would find out that Label had been grabbed by Russians, drafted into their army, and killed in action in 1943. So now they really didn't know what to do and where to go. The despair over not knowing what happened to Label was overwhelming. They decided to go back to Shavel, after all. They slept wherever they could, in the fields and the forests, and they were lucky the weather was warm and clear. On their return to Shavel, the Nazis were in full control. They announced that Jews were no longer permitted to walk on the sidewalks. They were required to wear a yellow Star of David, no smaller than 3 inches. No food was to be brought into the ghetto, other than the meager rations that they supplied. Smuggling in food was punishable by death. The Jews created a Judenrat, a committee of respected members of the community who would try to serve on the Jews' behalf. Committees of 3 non-Jews and 1 Jew went from door to door to make lists of occupants. Jews were forced to help the non-Jews move out of the areas that were to become the ghetto and into former Jewish homes in the better part of town. The committees decided which Jews would get to stay in which house, and Jews were given barbed wire to create and surround the ghetto where they were now imprisoned. That took 1 week. The committees also decided which Jews would be sent to another town, presumably to find work. The Jewish committee members had no idea they were sending fellow Jews to their death. At the time the ghetto was created, there were about 12,000 Jews in Shovel, and by the time the Germans were finished, there were only about 4,000 left in the ghetto. As for those who were left in Shovel, the Germans would squeeze 5 families into an apartment with the kitchen the size of a broom closet. And don't underestimate the difficulty for multiple mothers to cook what little food they had for their families under those conditions. On Erev Rosh Hashanah, Germans rounded up all the elderly Jews in the ghetto. Though Nathan's mother was only 41, her gray hair made her appear older. She was among those taken away and killed. In the meantime, Nathan's father worked in a leather factory. Nathan registered with the work committee as an electrician, and Sima was assigned to manual labor such as digging potatoes or factory work making bricks. As an electrician, Nathan took advantage of having a tool bag that he used to smuggle in food and medicine. Everyone had to endure violence, humiliation. Everyone just did what they could to survive another day. In the fall of 1943, a Gentile named Antonidas, who was a friend of my grandfather's from their hometown, came to the ghetto gate. He wanted to help the Katz family escape. How many people in the Katz family? Well, there was Nathan and his father and his girlfriend Sima, Nathan's cousin Perry, Perry's mother and father, and Perry's girlfriend Rita. There were 7 people. At first, Nathan's father didn't want to go. He said, whatever will be with Kol Yisrael will be with us. Soon he would change his mind. Also that fall, people heard that Jews were being sent to concentration camps, but if you were a married couple, they would send you together. That was when Sima and Nathan and Perry and Reva decided to get married. They went in front of the Judenrat and declared, by this ring you are consecrated to me according to the laws of Moses and Israel, and boom, they were married. The whole thing took less than 5 minutes, and the parents were happy that the 2 couples were married before they all escaped together. On November 5th, the Nazis brought in trucks and went through the ghetto from house to house, apartment by apartment, taking away any children who didn't know that they should have been hiding. And by now it was clear that if the Germans took you away, you weren't coming back. After this Kinderaktie, as it came to be called, people were so distraught they couldn't even speak. They realized it was getting closer to their end. And with that, Sima and Nathan and his father decided to accept Antonidas' offer and escape the ghetto before it was too late. Perry and Reva and his parents had escaped earlier. It took a whole month to hear that they had arrived safely at their destination. Now it was Sima and Nathan's turn. There was no more time to delay. So on the December day that they decided to escape, their hearts were full of bitterness and sorrow. It was a gray day with snow falling and a strong wind. Seema, Nathan, and Nathan's father left the ghetto together that morning with the other Jews who worked at the nearby leather factory. A Jewish policeman stood at the gate. He knew they didn't work in the factory, but they asked him to keep it quiet, and he understood and let them enter with the other workers. Seema and Nathan spent the day hidden in a locked closet. That night, when the workday was over, they ripped off their yellow stars and went out through the main gate with the Gentile Lithuanian workers. They walked on the sidewalk to a prearranged safe house on the outskirts of town. They were so scared, but they were lucky. The weather was awful, and no one bothered to stop them. The woman at the safe house didn't ask any questions. She took them up to the attic immediately and told them to not make any noise. And they stayed there for 5 days, waiting for Antonidas to pick them up. And Antonidas arrived on the 6th day. He harnessed and fed the horses to prepare for their 10-hour trip. Seema bleached her hair blonde so she would look less Jewish. The snow was falling, heavy and wet, and it was the best weather. The hope was that few people would be on the road in weather like that. They waited for dark, and then they left bundled into the wagon with blankets. And every time they did pass someone on the road, they were so terrified they thought their hearts would fall out of their chests. At one point, they thought they were going to be killed because somebody passed them and yelled, "Ha! You're traveling with a wagon full of Jews." But it didn't stop them. Finally, they were reunited with the other members of their family. 7 people stayed in one small 10 by 10 foot room. It was very crowded, and they slept on the floor, but they were happy to be together and happy to be alive. The homeowner at this house took payment in gold. They were locked in a room and were let out once every 24 hours and only at night. And after 6 weeks, it became clear that someone else in the household knew that they were hiding in the room and it wasn't safe anymore. So they asked the homeowner to call Antonidas and find them another place. Antonidas arrived right away and found them a place on the farm of a Mr. and Mrs. Zileviches. They had 4 teenage children living at home, and they all knew what it meant to hide Jews. If found, they would all be killed. But not only did they hide all 7 of them, they didn't take any money. They hid in a shack where chickens were kept in the winter. It had a heater, so they'd be able to survive the bitter cold weather. Stasia, the Zilevich's oldest teenage daughter, would bring them food. Sometimes there was more food, sometimes there was less food. They stayed inside, indoors, day and night, and sometimes got on each other's nerves. But think of spending 24/7 in one room with 6 of your own family members. In order to create a hiding space inside the chicken coop, they decided to build a double wall. They wanted to make it look like a carpenter's workroom and sleep quarters for farm hands. They spread sawdust on the floor and hung up some tools on the wall. They put up a false wall, papered it with newspapers that they charred and smoked to make look old. The hiding space was about 18 inches deep and about 10 foot wide with a narrow bench. They put a bed in front of the wall and an opening under the bed, the size of a manhole cover, for them to crawl through. The bed was attached to a piece of the wall and secured with the handle on the back. And once inside the wall, they used the handle to pull the bed and wall panel into place and sat shoulder to shoulder. Over the course of the months that they stayed there, they would practice drills to see how fast they could get into their hiding space. And one day, 7 months after building that wall, all that practice saved their lives. Sadly, Antonidas, who offered to help them escape, who arranged and took them to multiple safe houses, and who would never take money for all that he did to save lives, Antonidas was betrayed for hiding Jews. The Nazis went to his farm and killed everyone they found. They then headed to the Zhelevich's farm because they were also under suspicion. A neighboring farmer who heard what had just happened and what was about to happen ran a shortcut through the fields to the Zhelevich's farm. And with the news, the 7 quickly hid behind the wall. The Nazis entered the chicken coop where they were hiding. Since my grandfather had a chronic cough, it was decided that Sima would hold a pillow and have the responsibility to cover his mouth and do what she needed to do in case he made a noise. Can you imagine how she felt holding that pillow, knowing that she was expected to smother her father-in-law if he began to cough so that she could save everyone else's life? The Nazis knocked on 3 walls to see if they were hollow, but didn't bother knocking on the far wall, the one with the bed in front of it and my family behind it. That night, Mrs. Zhelevichus understandably told them they had to leave because she was so frightened that the Nazis would return. And one of the teenage sons found them another farm to hide in. This time they were in a hayloft, in a space created between the bales of hay and the edge of the barn roof. But 3 weeks later, that location became unsafe. And again, they were told they had to leave. By now, it was early fall of 1944, and they were headed back into the woods. Can you imagine how dispirited they felt? In fact, at this point, Nathan's aunt suggested they all commit suicide. But the younger generation weren't in favor of that idea. As long as they were alive, there was hope. And luckily, the Zhelevich's daughter found them another place. She found a place on her boyfriend's farm that he managed. There was a huge storage facility filled to the top with hay, and they found a hiding space between the wall and the hay. Their fresh air came from small cracks in the wall. Through a hole in the wall, each of them were given a carrot a day, and they got a bottle of water they could all share. Already malnourished, they soon suffered the consequences of their meager rations. Their teeth loosened, their stomachs bloated. Because they hadn't been able to bathe for a very long time, they became infested with lice, a torment they could hardly endure. The only reason they could bear those terrible conditions was because they knew the war would soon be over. They knew because they could hear the workers as they gossiped when they came in the mornings to milk the cows. That was their news radio station. But it lifted their spirits, it kept them going, it gave them hope. And after 4 weeks in the rotting hay, their food supply stopped when a Russian army unit moved into the barn for shelter. The 7 didn't come out of hiding, though, because they were afraid of what the Russian soldiers would do to them. They held out for 3 more days and then had no choice but to come out of their hiding space. They were frightful looking. And the guards called their captain, who happened to be Jewish, and he sent for a unit doctor who told them not to eat a lot or they would become very ill. They were permitted a few bites of food and some tea every hour or so. And even though the soldiers made a feast in their honor, they survived because they followed the doctor's orders. For them, those few bites were feast enough. And now that the Russians had liberated them and the Germans were gone, the manager of the farm filled a wagon with food and drove the family of 7 back to Shavel. They found the city had burned almost to the ground, and it had changed hand three times between Stalin and Hitler and Stalin again. The danger was not yet over. The KGB, the arrests, the interrogations, and the violence the Soviets inflicted became part of their lives. And it was clear to them that the Soviets liberated Lithuania. They really were not free. So they bought false identification papers on the black market, and they planned their next escape. After more than 2 harrowing months of briberies and robberies and wandering the forest at night, lost, traveling from Vilna, Lithuania through Poland, they finally made it to Berlin. And they were met at the Berlin train station by members of a Zionist organization who brought them to a displaced persons camp. On May 5th, 1946, they arrived in the American Zone in Germany. So after more than 5 years, they finally felt like they were free people. They were liberated from Hitler, from Stalin, from oppression, and Sima soon discovered that they were going to have a baby. Not only were they free, but they were going to bring a new Jewish generation into the world. My sister, Miriam, was born in Feldafing DP camp in January 1947. It was a former training camp for Nazi youth, and now it housed Jewish survivors from every country. Ironic, huh? My parents applied to the American Council and ultimately received their visas and sailed to New York City. And with just one old aluminum beat-up suitcase and $90 in their pockets, Sima and Nathan Katz, with their 4-year-old daughter Miriam, arrived in New York Harbor at 6 a.m. on the luckiest day of their lives, Friday the 13th, March 1951. 10 years later, by 1961, the original 7 were reunited and lived on the same block in Jackson Heights, Queens. But by then, we were 11 around Sima and Nathan's Seder table. From those 2 couples who rode their bicycles to sneak out of town for their double dates, there were 4 daughters. And then came 8 grandchildren. And we're up to 13 great-grandchildren and counting. And yes, all of us cousins still celebrate Passover together. And Thanksgiving, and any holiday and Simcha we can. Sima shared her story for the first time publicly in 2018 at UJA Long Island's first Witness Project. This year, on May 17th, there will be a 5th presentation of Witness Project. Different survivors, different stories, a different multimedia format at Tillis Center. There's information about Witness Project in the lobby, and I hope you can join us. This was not an easy story to tell, but it's my family story, and an important one for you all to know. So thank you for listening and participating in tonight's Yom Hashoah program. And thank you all for becoming witnesses.
Thank you, Rita, for sharing your family story, your mother's story with us. At this time, I'm going to ask Julian Ostro to come forward. He's going to introduce to you a wonderful art project by Arkita Zion.
Kita Zion has created artworks as a part of their reflection of the Holocaust studies this year. The name of our art exhibit is entitled From Destruction to Rebirth. Kita Zion students have had the opportunity to learn and reflect about the difficult atrocities of the Shoah. This exhibit is in honor of the commemoration of this evening as we, the students of Kita Zion, take upon ourselves to remember but also live with the honor of rebirth and leading productive Jewish lives with pride, responsibility, and joy.
And at this time, I'd like to ask Harris and Alvin to come forward and Kita Zion to take their place on the steps for a beautiful song called Pray for a Brighter Day.
Give us the wisdom to make this world a better place for young and old, where every person can just be free and be good friends like you and me. Give us an answer to our request. Help us become our very best. And so we promise to lend a hand, to mend a heart, do all we can. Oh God, we're asking you today. Give us a sign, show us the way. And when tomorrow comes, we'll pray for a brighter day. Oh God, we're asking you today. Give us a sign, show us the way. And when tomorrow comes, we'll pray for a brighter day.
In your programs, we have printed the song Zognit Kaimul, the hymn of the partisans. Zognit Kaimul, as du gehst im letzten Weg. Never say that you are going your last way. Please join me. Zognit Kaimul, as du gehst im letzten Weg. Hocht himlen bleiene, vor sternene bloje Tag. Hocht himlen blach, kommen wird noch unser ausgebäckte Schuh. Zweckt Apoik von unser Trott, wir seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebäckte Schuh. Zweckt Apoik von unseren Treut, wir seinen Do. Never say that you are going your last way. Though lead-filled skies above blot out the blue of day, The hour for which we long will certainly appear. The earth shall thunder neath our tread that we are here. The hour for which we long will certainly appear. The earth shall thunder neath our tread that we are here. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, Gott Himmeln bleiene, verstehen bläue Tag, kommen wird noch unser Reis gebäckten schon. Svetapoik von uns entreut mir seinen da, kommen wird noch unser Reis gebäckten schon. Svetapoik vor uns entreut mir seinen da. Thank you. And I'd like to call Roz Landsman for some closing remarks, after which we will all join in the singing of Hatikva.
I'd like to thank Rita Levy and Seema Katz for sharing their family's incredible story with our community. And the beautiful flowers on the bima were a gift to us from Seema. Thank you. It's only through the eyes of the witnesses that we can even begin to see the insanity and horror that occurred. Cantor, your voice and song were poignantly inspiring. And Rabbis Lucas and Rosenthal, thank you for always bringing spiritual comfort to our community and guiding us with strength and caring into the future. I'd like to thank my fellow committee members and the staff of Temple Beth Shalom, Barbara Cooper for the design of the program booklet, Doug Yoel and David Schatzkavelli for live stream and audio video services, and Adrian and his maintenance staff, and for all of their hard work in making this evening possible. Above all, I'd like to thank the students and the teachers who along with us tonight, came to honor. As we watch and we listen to you, we know that the future is bright, and that we will never forget that we, the Jewish people, will march on and create a future that is filled with kindness, justice, and hope. This evening we have honored the memory of 6 million Jews who perished during the Shoah, and those who survived those unthinkable times. This evening we committed ourselves and our community to never forget. We will end our program with the singing of Hatikva, the national anthem of the Free State of Israel, a state that those who died and lived through the Holocaust only dreamt of. Hatikva, a song of hope, a song that reflects our 2,000-year-old hope of having our own free and independent country, is now a reality. The lyrics are adapted from a poem by Naftali Heretz Ingbar, a Jewish poet who ironically came from Zoljahev, Ukraine. Never forget, never again. Please rise for the singing of Hatikva.
Oh, Lord, Leva, 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 We thank you all for joining us. Please drive carefully.
I also have to apologize to the kids, because I think the boys were really wrong today. And my son is one of them, who was probably one of the worst.
At their best.
Why is it?
I'm lucky I can't believe you're sitting.
Yeah, but they were even torturing the three on the spot. The boys wouldn't be
I don't think they love this torture. I think it's just fun.
Yes, but how do you do that? Then they're turning around and then they're...
I feel like I should make my son write an apology. I think that it's not right. It's my grandma.
We're too short in time. I know, it's always too short.